Crazy ANNAOJ by Fritz Leiber. Originally published in the February 1968 issue of Galaxy magazine, which republished it in their French edition in October 1970. It appeared in 3 anthologies: 101 Science Fiction Stories in 1986, The Giant Book of Science Fiction Stories in 1992, and 100 Astounding Little Alien Stories in the same year. Appearances in collections of the author's stories include The Book of Fritz Leiber in 1974, an Italian one called Spazio in 1987, and Horrible Imaginings in 2004. Read by Daryl T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Crazy ANNAOJ. 2 things will last to the end of time, at least for the tribes of Western man, no matter how far his spaceships rove. They are sorcery and romantic love, which come to much the same thing in the end. For the more that becomes possible to man, the more wildly he yearns for the impossible, and runs after witches and sorcerers to find it. While the farther he travels to the star-ribboned rim of the Milky Way and beyond, the more he falls in love with far-off things and yearns for the most distant and unattainable beloved. Also, witchcraft and sorcery are games it takes 2 to play, the witch or sorcerer and his or her client. The oldest and wealthiest man in the Milky Way and its loveliest girl laughed as they left the gypsy's tent, pitched just outside the jewel-pillared space field of the most exclusive pleasure planet between the galaxy's 2 dizzily whirling, starry arms. The gypsy's black cat, gliding past them back into the tent, only smiled cryptically. A private, eiderdown-surfaced slidewalk rolled out like the red carpet of ancient cliché, received the begemmed slippers of the honeymooning couple, and carried them toward the most diamond-glittering pillar of them all, the private hyperspace yacht Eros of the galactic shipping magnate Philippe Filitsak and his dazzling young bride, ANNAOJ. He looked 21 and was 20 times that old. Cosmetic surgery and organ replacements and implanted featherweight power prosthetics and pacemakers had worked their minor miracles. At any one time, there were 3 physicians in the Eros listening in on the functionings of his body. She looked and was 17, but the wisdom in her eyes was that of Eve, of Helen of Troy, of Cleopatra, of Forzane. It was also the wisdom of Juliet, of Iseult, of Francesca da Rimini. It was a radiant but not a rational wisdom, and it had a frightening ingredient that had been known to make nurses and ladies' maids and the wives of planetary presidents and systemic emperors shiver alike. Together now on the whispering white slidewalk, planning their next pleasures, they looked the pinnacle of cosmic romance fulfilled. He, dashing and handsome and young, except that there was something just a shade careful about the way he carried himself. She, giddy and slim, with a mind that was all sentimental or amorous whim, except for that diamond touch of terrifyingly fixed white light in her most melting or mischievous glance. Despite, or perhaps because of, those 2 exceptions, they seemed more akin to the sparkling stars above them than even to the gorgeous pleasure planet around them. He had been born in a ghetto on Andvari III and had fought his way up the razor-runged ladder of economic power until he owned fleets of hyperspace freighters, a dozen planets, and the governments of 10 times that many. She had been born in a slum on Aphrodite IV, owning only herself. It had taken her 6 Terran months to bring herself to the attention of Philippe Filitsak by way of 3 beauty contests and 1 bit part in a stereographic all-senses sex film, and 6 more months to become his 17th wife instead of one more of his countless casual mistresses. The beepers of social gossip everywhere had hinted discreetly about the infatuation potential of fringe senile megabillionaires and the coldly murderous greed of teenage starlets. And ANNAOJ and Philippe Feliczak had smiled at this gossip, since they knew they loved each other, and why. For their matching merciless determination to get what they wanted and keep it, and for the distance that had been between them and was no longer. Of the two, ANNAOJ's love was perhaps the greater, accounting for the icy, fanatic glint in her otherwise nymphette's eyes. They had laughed on leaving the drab tent of the gypsy fortune-teller, who herself owned a small, beat-up spaceship covered with cabalistic signs, because the last thing she had said to the shipping king, fixing his bright, youthful eyes with her bleared ones, had been, "Philippe Feliczak, you have journeyed far, very far, for such a young man, yet you shall make even longer journeys hereafter. Your past travels will be trifles compared to your travels to come." Both Philippe and ANNAOJ knew that he had been once to the Andromeda Galaxy and twice to both Magellanic Clouds, though they had not told the silly old gypsy so, being, despite their iron wills, kindly lovers, still enamored of everything in the cosmos by virtue of their mutual love. They also knew that Philippe had determined to restrict his jauntings henceforth to the Milky Way, to keep reasonably close to the greatest geriatric scientists, and they were both reconciled, at least by day, to the fact that despite all his defenses, death would come for him in 10 or 20 years. Yet, although they did not now tell each other so, the gypsy's words had given a spark of real hope to their silly night promises under the stars like gems and the galaxies like puffs of powder that "we will live and love forever." Their loveliest night had been spent 100 light years outside the Milky Way. It was to be Philippe's last extragalactic venture, where the Eros had emerged briefly from hyperspace, and they had lolled and luxuriated for hours under the magnifying crystal skylight of the master stateroom, watching only the far-off galaxies, with all of their moiling, toiling home galaxy out of sight beneath the ship. But now, as if the cryptic universe had determined to give an instant sardonic rejoinder to the gypsy's prediction, the eiderdown slidewalk had not murmured them halfway to the Eros when a look of odd surprise came into Philippe's bright, youthful eyes, and he clutched at his heart and swayed and would have toppled except that ANNAOJ caught him in her strong, slender arms and held him to her tightly. Something had happened in the body of Philippe Feliczak that could not be dealt with by all its pacemakers and its implanted and remotely controlled hormone dispensers, nor by any of the coded orders frantically tapped out by the 3 physicians monitoring its organs and systems. It took 30 seconds for the ambulance of the Eros to hurtle out from the yacht on a track paralleling the slidewalk and brake to a bone-jolting, silent halt. During that half-minute, ANNAOJ watched the wrinkles come out on her husband's smooth face like stars at nightfall in the sky of a planet in a star cluster. She wasted 1 second on the white-hot impulse to have the gypsy immediately strangled, but she knew that the great aristocrats of the cosmos do not take vengeance on its vermin, and that in any event she had far more pressing business with which to occupy herself fully tonight. She clasped the pulseless body a trifle more tightly, feeling the bones and prosthetics through the layer of slack flesh. In 2 minutes more, in the surgery of the Eros, Philippe's body was in a dissipatory neutrino field, which instantly sent all its heat packing off at the speed of light, but in particles billions of times slimmer than the photons of heat, so that the body was supercooled to the temperature of frozen helium without opportunity for a single disruptive crystal to form. Then, without consulting the Spacefield Dispatching Station or any other authority of the Pleasure Planet, ANNAOJ ordered the Eros blasted into hyperspace and driven at force speed to the galaxy's foremost geriatrics clinic on Menkar 5, though it lay halfway across the vast Milky Way. During the anxious, grueling trip, she did only one thing quite out of the ordinary. She had her husband's supercooled body sprayed with a transparent insulatory film, which would adequately hold its coolth for a matter of days, and placed in the master stateroom. Once a week, the body was briefly returned to the dissipatory neutrino field to bring its temperature down again to within a degree of 0 Kelvin. Otherwise, she behaved as she always had, changing costume 7 times a day, paying great attention to her coiffure and to her cosmetic and rejuvenation treatments, being idly charming to the officers and stewards. But she spent hours in her husband's office, studying his business and working to the edge of exhaustion his 3 secretaries, and she always took her small meals in the master stateroom. On Menkar 5, they told her, after weeks of test and study, that her husband was beyond reawakening, at least at the present state of medical skill, and to come back in 10 years. More would be known then. At that, ANNAOJ nodded frigidly and took up the reins of her husband's business, conducting them entirely from the Eros as it skipped about through space and hyperspace. Under her guidance, the Filitzak economic empire prospered still more than it had under its founder. She successfully fought or brought off the claims of Philippe's 11 surviving divorced wives, 100 of his relatives, and a score of his prime managers. She regularly returned to Menkar 5 and frequently visited other clinics and sought out famous healers. She became expert at distinguishing the charlatans from the dedicated, the conceited from the profound. Yet at times she also consulted sorcerers and wizards and witch doctors. Incantations in exotic tongues and lights were spoken and glowed over Philippe's frigid form. Extraterrestrial stenches filled the surgery of the Eros, and there were focused there the meditations of holy creatures which resembled man less than a spider does, while 3 or 4 fuming yet dutiful doctors of the Eros's dozen waited for the crucial moment in the ceremony when they would obediently work a 5-second reversal of the neutrino field to bring the body briefly to normal temperature to determine whether the magic had worked. But neither science nor sorcery could revive him. She bullied many a police force and paid many a detective agency to hunt down the gypsy with the black cat, but the old crone and her runic spaceship had vanished as utterly as the vital spark in Philippe Filitzak. No one could tell whether ANNAOJ really believed that the gypsy had had something to do with the striking down of her husband and might be able to bring him alive, or whether the witch had merely become another counter in the sorcery game of which ANNAOJ had suddenly grown so fond. In the course of time, ANNAOJ took many lovers. When she tired of one, she would lead him for the first time into the master stateroom of the Eros, and show him the filmed and frosty body of her husband, and send him away without as much as a parting touch of her fingertips, and then lie down beside the cold, cold form under the cold, cold stars of the skylight. And she never once let another woman set foot in that room. Not the humblest nor ugliest maid, not the greatest sculptress of the Pleiades, not the most feared and revered sorceress in the Hyades. She became known as Crazy ANNAOJ, though no one thought it to her face or whispered it within a parsec of her. When she still looked 17, though her age was 70 times that, for the sciences of geriatrics and juvenation had progressed greatly since her husband's collapse. She felt an unfamiliar weariness creeping on her, and she ordered the Eros to make once more for Menkar 5 at force speed. The Eros never emerged from hyperspace. Most say she was lost there, scuttled by ANNAOJ as she felt death coming on her. A few maintain she exited into altogether another universe, where crazy ANNAOJ is still keeping up her search for the healer who can revive Philippe, or playing her game with the doctors and witch doctors and with her lovers. But in any case, the gypsy's prediction was fulfilled, for in the course of ANNAOJ's voyages, the body of Philippe Filitsac had been carried twice to Andromeda, and also to 2 galaxies in Virgo, 3 in Leo, and 1 in Coma Berenices. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.